At midnight on August the 25th, 2017, Ro Mayo Ali was woken by intense gunfire, as he recalls it for an article in CNN. Troops had entered his town and houses were being set on fire. As a young Rohingya, he was used to decades of oppression. He'd been banned from university, had documents confiscated, and watched members of his community just disappear because they were from a Muslim ethnic minority group in a predominantly Buddhist Myanmar. Just like nearly 700,000 other Rohingya, Ro was left homeless and was forced to flee to Bangladesh. The UN have described this as genocide, with at least 6,700 people murdered by the military. According to Amnesty, Meta's role was not merely that of a passive and neutral platform that responded inadequately. Its algorithms proactively amplified anti-Rohingya posts that were designed to cause incitement. The UN's independent fact-finding mission found that the role of social media was significant in a country where Facebook is the internet. Is this the worst thing that Facebook has ever done? It's certainly a heartbreaking story that shows that the people who have built the power do not know how to have responsibility for that power. I'll tell you more about the role that Facebook played in that genocide later in this episode. I'm Dr. Becky Sage, and this is episode 4 of my deep dive into Meta in my show, Is It Marmite? We ask, do we love it or do we hate it? We are drawing close to a conclusion in this series. The idea is to try to find the nuance behind the headlines so that we can understand how to be better stewards for the power that we develop in our technology, in our businesses, or in the social fabrics of our lives. The thing is, we heroize founders or we vilify them. But to do both of those things without digging deep are just signs that we're not really thinking. In this episode, we're going to look into decision by decision what was knowable at the time. What decisions might you have made if you were in the same circumstances? But this episode is all about the controversies, and we have 20 years of them, so strap in. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe if you are enjoying this series, and let me know, how are you building responsible power in your life? So here we are at episode 4 of this series. We're nearly at the end. Episode 1 was the origin story, and episode 2 we examined the social media dream that never came true. In episode 3 we looked at the levers that allowed Facebook to grow, looking at how 6 elements created one of the most powerful companies in history. In this episode, we're going to look at how through these 6 elements, that growth has come at a price that I don't think a responsible founder should be willing to pay. So in the last episode, we talked about people and culture and the principles that seem to run through that. Protect Mark Zuckerberg at all costs, move fast and break things, and align yourself to talented and powerful people. So over the years, there have been several reports of the culture within Facebook. As I mentioned, the move fast and break things is a very open mantra for Facebook, and that seems to apply for people within the company. If you can't move fast without breaking, then that's probably not the place for you. But is overworking to be expected in an exciting, dynamic, young tech company? Facebook gets described as having a cult-like culture. It's a place where there are popularity contests, where issues are hidden away. And you're meant to kind of be happy and positive, particularly about Facebook, all of the time. But obviously, as a founder, that's not a great way to build a team. It's not the best way to get the best out of talent. See, if individuals have to be liked all the time, they're not actually going to be delivering the best, the most effective strategy. They are less likely to speak up if there's a dominant person in the room, so you're also going to miss out on really great talent and what they have to offer. In addition, these kind of environments can cause great stress and anxiety. You've got team players working on fight and flight all the time. Not only are they going to potentially burn out quicker because of chronic stress, but they're also likely to be making bad decisions. But that's really just scratching the surface of the issues here. Sarah Wynne Williams' book goes so much into many of the issues of Facebook, and as she describes what it was like to be employed there. Some of the most shocking things in her book were how she described Sheryl Sandberg and how she interacted with her staff, which again, this idea of cult, very close, very comfortable, is allegedly how Sheryl Sandberg was, even inviting staff members, or rather demanding, allegedly, that they come and sleep with her in the bed when they're on a private jet, amongst many other things. There are also essay accusations in the book, and another person put in a very bad light is Joel Kaplan. But did these people ever get reprimanded by Facebook? No. And perhaps one of the most telling things is how Meta have responded to the publication of Sarah Wynne Williams' book, which is just to do, as we've been told about their culture, try to silence it. We should only be putting on a happy front. And of course, Sarah Wynne Williams isn't the only whistleblower as well. Frances Haugen is also someone who has brought things to light, and we'll come on to her reports later on in this episode. The other thing that indicates the cult-like status is the fact that people are actually going to jail or being arrested, and I talked about this in the last episode for Facebook. Sarah Wynne Williams talks about being an outsider in her book, and apparently a more senior member of the team once came up to her and said, look at who your boss is, look at who your boss's boss is, and their boss, and the ultimate boss. They're all of a certain mold. I mean, what they highlighted was that they were all Jewish and from Harvard. Not that the ethnicity or the race has anything to do specifically with this, but the point being, people were being hired in their own image. If you don't have diversity, then you don't have challenges. You're not able to look at the world with perspective. Maybe that helps you build some kind of monolith, but does it really help you build something that is going to be effective in people's lives? Now, while people have said that Meta is a good place to work, it's a place where you can develop your skills, and that can be really helpful for you. It looks good on a CV, but a lot of people have been very unhappy there. And of course, over recent years, there have been a lot of layoffs as well. Just recently, Meta have actually been sued by 26 staff in Oakland because they say that AI monitoring data was used to decide who was going to be laid off. It disproportionately identified people with health difficulties and people who were pregnant. So they are now suing the company. And one question I would ask as a founder is, or we should all be asking about this particular situation, is if a whistleblower is needed to uncover the harm that is built into your organization, what does that say about your culture? If you built a business, would you be okay with that? I definitely wouldn't. If that's the price for building a business that has impact and creates benefits for the world, although other things too, which we'll come on to in a minute, then there's something very wrong with how our current society works, and we need to be here to showcase that we can do it another way. So now let's move on to the things that underpin the data and the technology. These things are things that I've actually already discussed because they come up whenever we're talking about AI companies. We've first of all got data workers, and specifically data workers for Facebook. And in a study that was done, it was shown that 88% of data workers for Facebook ended up with PTSD because of the traumatic things that they had seen. The other thing is, it's a very unstable career, and the big tech companies are not very careful with those data workers because they see them as contractors, they're in other countries. There's a lot of exploitation that goes on. A Kenyan court has said that even though these are international contractors, Facebook are still responsible for them in the same way as they would be if they were an employer. So the use of data workers is something that needs to be evolved. But of course, the physical footprint is also something that is a massive issue. The environmental impact and the energy usage of AI data centers, something that is only projected to get worse and worse. Facebook, buoyed by the current government, have been very clear that their energy strategy is one that is highly dependent on fossil fuels. One thing they have said is that they are going to be off-grid. So obviously there were a lot of potential issues with data centers being built and drawing energy from local communities. This is one thing that they have dealt with, apart from the fact that all you're doing is adding to climate change and therefore putting other issues out there in the world without actually showing us any real benefits from it. Just like other AI companies, there are many copyright issues associated with Meta and how it's trained its models. Interestingly, Meta actually won a case on copyright. Unfortunately, the reason they won this case, according to the judge, is because not enough evidence was presented. And as always, the argument is that open sourced AI models are powering our future. It's about helping create transformative innovations, productivity, creativity, so it's fair use. The copyright question is one where I believe that the tech founders believe what they're saying, that they think that they're just here to do good, especially when it's like, these are open source models. It's like we're robbing from the elite, all these books, and then we're distributing that to all of mankind. But when work is taken and it fuels a machine that ultimately makes a few people very rich and powerful, then why should they get those things? Why should they get free raw material to fuel their machines? If you think differently, let me know in the comments. So when it comes to the tech and building of the tech, all the resource use as well in terms of raw materials required to drive the tech industry, the chips, the phones, the infrastructure, they know. They know how much resource use there is. They know the implications around exploiting the Earth's resources and energy, and they continue to make these decisions. But then I'm also thinking, I'm sitting here and I'm like, I've got a phone and a device, and you know, I buy these things so I can live my life. Where is the line? Should I go totally off-grid? Or should we be demanding more from the companies that give us these tools that can actually make lives better? I believe in innovation. I do believe in building new technology. But as I've said in many episodes, the resource usage, the supply chain issues, the energy usage, I think that they're all creative constraints that could drive real innovation. Businesses are trying to find this sweet spot where they can offer the right amount of value to their customers in order to get enough money back in to grow the business, cover the costs, and pay their shareholders. In the case of Meta, where a massive proportion of their income comes from ads, those ads can be very finely targeted and offer a lot of value to those companies, a lot of return on their investment on their ad spend, if we keep people on the platform for longer, if we know a lot about the behavior and the interests and the patterns of the people who are using it, and if we can manipulate the minds of the people that we're showing the ads to. Possibly one of the most damning things about Meta is that their core value proposition relies on manipulating and exploiting vulnerable minds, specifically young minds. Frances Haugen was a Facebook whistleblower who worked as a Facebook researcher. When she testified in front of a Senate panel, she said, "I believe that Facebook's products harm children, that the profit-optimizing machine is generating self-harm and self-hate, especially for vulnerable minds like teenage girls." Others in the team say Frances Haugen didn't directly work on child safety issues, and she has no knowledge of this topic from her work at Facebook. Forgive me for being disinclined to believe that. With the social media ban recently happening, obviously there's been a lot in the news about the kind of harm social media can do to young minds. And I talked about that a little bit more in episode 2. What we do know is that certainly young people self-report that they struggle with it, with 30% of teenage girls saying that Instagram made them feel worse about their bodies. One of the challenges with something like that is there's no baseline to compare it to. So, of course, they can say that when they look at Facebook, it's worse. However, had they been brought up in my generation, when we had magazines, newspapers, I talked about this the other day, would that have felt worse? Would it have felt better? Does the balance of social media also having body positivity on it make a difference? A lot of this research is still in its infancy. What we do know is that Meta deliberately targeted people between the age of 13 and 17. They were the ones that advertisers loved to put stuff in front of because they had nice, malleable brains, and they would want to buy things to keep up with their friends and peers. There's also been some reports that this even happens at the pre-teen stage with Facebook. Young people get addicted to social media before they even know really how to live, to communicate out in the outside world, or even within themselves. There was a report under the title of Project Mercury, which was an internal Facebook report, which showed that people who stopped using Facebook for a week felt less depressed, less anxiety, less loneliness, and less social comparison. And Meta didn't publish it. It's interesting, I was speaking to a politician who's done a lot of work on online safety, and they said for them it's just so scary because this is like era where there was drug addiction. Many people compare it to smoking and tobacco companies. We are doing harm and we are going to pay for it in the future. Let's roll that back now. Let's be more mindful about how we do this. Let's not build our profit engine off the addiction of teenagers. The fact that governments are doing the banning rather than companies doing the changes, I think is really damning to Meta and to the other social media companies. I do think of this as a founder perspective, and myself and so many of the founders I worked with, like I said, are really trying to find that value proposition that works. Maybe so focused. When I was talking about the Feifei Li journey, I was talking about that founder blinker, so focused on creating the value proposition, on creating those growth metrics that you need to create, that maybe you don't notice what harm you're doing. Do you stop and ask the right questions at the right time? From my perspective, I think that's part of the founder's job. But what if you do have a blind spot? How late is too late to say, we just didn't know? Like, I wonder, like, all businesses or all endeavors use different resources to create some value and put it out there in the world. Data is a really interesting one. And I think the debates have already been had about who data actually belongs to as a resource and who should get to create some value from that. But the value exchange that was done with Meta, you get to use our tools for free if you give us your data, was not explicit from the beginning. People couldn't give informed consent, even if there were pages and pages of T's and C's for people to sign. That's kind of shifted now, but actually there's still issues. And I keep thinking, like, why don't we just get off these platforms then? Just like we're doing with the teens and the social media bans, just stop using the platforms. But I actually think we're at a point in time, and going back to episode 2 on the benefits of social media, we're at a point in time where you're actually at a disadvantage in your career, in the workplace, in your life, in your social network, if you don't use certain tools. It'll be different for different people. There are really a lot of news stories, a lot of court cases about Meta and the harm it does to children. So Let's just have a very quick look at that. So in March this year, a court in Mexico ordered Meta to pay $375 million for misleading users over the safety of its platform for children. The jury found Facebook liable because it exposed them to sexually explicit material and contact with predators. Of course, Meta disagree with this outcome. Also, earlier this year, a 20-year-old took social media companies to court because she said that she became addicted to these platforms before she was 10 years old. Spending hours every day scrolling, she became addicted, and that led to mental health problems. Both Meta and YouTube were on the stand, and the jury found Facebook 70% liable and YouTube 30% liable. In total, there was $6 million in damages. What is that to Facebook or Meta? It's incredibly small. I guess it's not small to the complainant. There are other such trials coming up. Probably one of the most high-profile cases is the Molly Russell inquest that happened here in the UK. Molly Russell died in 2017 at the age of 14 from an act of self-harm while she was suffering from depression. And it was found that the negative effects of social media, specifically Instagram, contributed to her death in more than a minimal way. Now, if you read Sarah Wynne Williams' book, the attitude of people in leadership positions was one that just felt careless people. And obviously, ultimately, the UK government has decided that any measures that have been put in place aren't good enough. That's why they are banning social media for teens. So if that was about generating value by doing harm to people and fulfilling a value proposition, then it almost seems inevitable at this point that their models will be controversial in some way. And you can't really mention the controversies of Facebook without mentioning Cambridge Analytica. Now, really, Cambridge Analytica goes all the way back to some of those technology levers we talked about. The open sourcing that allowed Facebook to have control, a decision that they'd made many, many years before. Could they possibly have predicted that it would have been used in this way? So let me just tell you a little bit about it. In 2014, the researcher Alexander Kogan created a personality quiz app on Facebook. If you were on Facebook back then, you remember all of those personality quizzes. I think maybe they still happen, but 300,000 users consented to take this quiz so they know more about themselves. Again, possibly playing into vulnerabilities. But through doing that, it wasn't just the 300,000 users that consented whose data got taken. It was the 87 million people who were connected to those 300,000 people via friend connections. With the Open Graph API, when one user logs in, they don't only give consent, it allowed them to pull data from everyone in that friend network. Now, did anyone know they were signing up for that when they first signed up to Facebook? So Kogan took this massive data set and sold it to Cambridge Analytica. Note that this did violate Facebook's developer policies, so he definitely shouldn't have done that. And then Cambridge Analytica created these psychographic profiles, which helped them to better understand personalities, fears, and political leanings. Therefore, they could do political micro-targeting. This allowed highly targeted, specific, sometimes misleading ads to be directed at very specific sectors of the voting population. They did this for the 2016 election, and they did it for the 2016 Brexit vote. However, a whistleblower came forward, yet another whistleblower in the Facebook story, Christopher Wiley, and journalists at The Guardian and the New York Times exposed what had happened. This was a massive scandal. There were always kind of little whispers about Facebook and data privacy and everything else up till that point. Cambridge Analytica filed for bankruptcy. Facebook faced large regulatory fines. In my view, Facebook absolutely could have done something differently. The key thing here was about accessing the friends' data, like one person consenting and that goes out to your entire network. That is a flaw in the system. That is something that if you weren't trying to move fast and break things, you could have picked up on. If you'd have done some scenarioing, come on. But the thing when it comes to Facebook and fines is they are essentially built into the strategy at the moment. Even the massive FTC fine, the $5 billion fine that they got following the Cambridge Analytica scandal, when that was reported, their actual share price went up. It made them about $10 billion. So they'd actually doubled the amount on the fine. I mean, it went up because shareholders felt it was less uncertain once they knew what the outcome of the investigation was. But both sides of the equation here, like from a regulatory perspective, why are we just fining these companies when they clearly don't care and they just put fines in as an expense? But also as a founder, if those fines are coming from things that are doing damage either to individuals or to wider society, you do have a responsibility. You do have a responsibility. Like, despite being one of the biggest ever, that fine was still only like 1/4's worth of income. And now, I mean, what are they doing this year? 200 billion? It's nothing. So as I go through all of this, what I'm hearing is just the harm, the damage, the destruction is built into the core of the business. You cannot decouple these things. And that's extremely concerning. And that's why I say, I mean, I just wrote an essay about the fact that we start talking about the ethics too late. This is why we need to do it at the beginning, before things get baked into your technology, into your value proposition, into your business model. Before you grow so big that you can't even see the damage that you're doing. And as I mentioned at the beginning, perhaps the biggest damage that has been done was perhaps the genocide of the Rohingya people. So we know a bit about the outcome, but how did they actually get there? Sarah Wynne Williams has a lot of this account in her book, so do go and read that if you want more specific detail from her first-hand experiences. Some say she's not necessarily a reliable witness, but she was overseeing Facebook's Asia political division at that point in time, so she was heavily involved in a lot of these conversations. So Myanmar was a place where it was being run by a military junta, and it was a very difficult place to get in and out of, and it was somewhere where there was very little internet. So you've already heard me say, quote from that UN report about Facebook is the internet. A very small percentage of people actually could get online, and it was very controlled by the military government. Between the years of around about 2014 and 2017, most of the population got online, but it was a very mobile-first strategy, and almost everyone essentially had Facebook as their homepage. It was the access to the internet. So Facebook is the tool that everybody is looking at. Maybe this is a sign of things to come, because you heard the stats I gave the other day about Facebook being the news source for a very large proportion of the population still. And because it can be targeted, that is very dangerous. So in Myanmar, all these people are online, and what civil groups are reporting was that, according to Sarah Wynne Williams, Facebook is being used to deliberately, systematically, and very effectively target not just peace and interface activists, but also journalists and anyone who deviates from the dominant junta narrative. And what they were starting to see there was there were all sorts of dangerous posts that were being put up. Lies about people, saying that Rohingya men had essayed Buddhist women, for example, and then those men would get attacked. All of this was leading to more and more violence and more destabilization. And there were hundreds of Facebook accounts destabilizing things. But according to Sarah Wynne Williams, when she would try to get things taken down by the central content team, which was based in Ireland, she kept getting pushback. They did not understand the political context, and they kept saying things like, this doesn't break the Facebook content policy rules. So things would stay up, even though in that local context, it was inciting more and more violence. A lot of the content that was getting put up was extremely dehumanizing. The Rohingya people were painted as terrorists, and this incited more and more violence. Perhaps for a young Mark Zuckerberg, when he first started building Facebook, he couldn't have pictured that things like this would happen, that fake news and, I was about to say, and propaganda can't do any harm, but history has taught us that it can. He's a smart man. He should understand this. Well, So on that night in 2017 when Romayo Ali was woken by gunshots, a mixture of the military and civilians was so riled up that they essentially forced a whole population of Rohingya to have to flee their homes. Now, I know it's wild to think that as a tech founder you have to think about things like this, but if your goal is to continue to accumulate as much money and power as possible, then, sorry I'm repeating myself, you have to take the responsibility that that power brings. What also gets me with this is, where is the oversight? Where is the governance? It just doesn't seem to be there. I mean, we saw this a bit with OpenAI, but at least OpenAI kind of made a show of creating a board that had some kind of ethics around it. Who is questioning the power, the decision makers in Facebook? Now, of course, what we're starting to see here is regulation arriving, so governance happening at a government level rather than at a business level. It wouldn't have to be that way if the businesses were taking responsibility. In my ideal world, both governments and businesses take responsibility. You're both sitting in positions of power. But I at least see from a government perspective that it's challenging because of the pace of change and the complexity of technology. From a business perspective, if you're running that business, you should understand those things and you should understand the implications of those things. So I've talked today in a pretty whistle-stop way about some of the harm that has been caused by Meta and its platforms, by its careless people. One thing they do seem to care about is making sure that Sarah Wynne Williams is not allowed to speak. I'll be honest, to some extent, this just shows me that they are petty, that they're childish, that they're not mature enough to deal with the power that they've been given. God, you don't agree with what she's saying? Maybe give us a real debate then. Show us some evidence that she is wrong. There seems to be a pretty consistent pattern now where Meta does know what's going on. It does know about the harm. People on the team are kind of scared to speak up. Some might say they're complicit, but others could be more empathetic than that and say this is people in jobs having to pay their bills, having to look after their families, driven by their own passion as well, and not feeling able to speak up in the moment because of the culture of this organization. Therefore, that harm goes out into the world or continues to happen in the world. It does not get disclosed as soon as it is noticed. But someone who was there does write it down, and when they are able to, when they are in a stronger position of power, they come out and they blow the whistle. Court cases, arbitration, goes up against all sorts of legal battles, and even if they don't win, they don't care because they've got enough money to ride this wave. Meanwhile, advertisers, other businesses, are paying nearly $200 billion to this company every single year to help them hold up their empire. I think a really good test of where you sit as somebody who's creating something is when somebody tells you something is going wrong, is your first instinct to go, we're entrepreneurs. Our job is to roll our sleeves up, solve problems, and try and fix this thing. Like, actually fix it. Not just fix the way the company is perceived, bring in the lawyers and pay the fines. So from my perspective, I see many failures in the Meta journey. Failures that I think leadership manages to hide from itself because they're still able to bring in the revenue that they're generating. What's interesting is it was baked into the business so early on. So there have definitely been failures of ethics. There have been decisions that should have been made, but leadership was able to just keep saying, we just didn't know. Ignoring the question of whether people are good or bad. It's more about how they exist in the systems that hold them up. Even if the leadership at Facebook did have great intentions about what this could do for the world, did they think about how that plays against their value proposition, their business models, and the political power they were trying to garner? I'm really excited for the social reckoning to come out because it's going to investigate some of this story is going to go deeper. Of course, I plan to make a video when it does come out. I will watch it and do a recap on it with a bit of a fact check, just like I did with The Social Network. With thinking about the film, what that also makes me think about is what I said at the end of the first episode. This came out 16 years ago, and the red flags were already there. Who decided not to see them, not to listen to them, not to respond to them? I'd say many of us, myself included. And maybe by understanding that, we also understand that these things aren't as cut and dry. That individuals should not be able to hold so much power alone, because all individuals can be seduced by power. My precious. Thank you for watching today. I hope you have enjoyed. I don't know if that's the right word for all of these stories. I'd certainly love to know what you think. What would you have done differently? What questions would you ask? What structures would you have in place? And if you have made it this far, don't forget to like and subscribe. One thing we do all have the power to do is try to make sure as many of people as possible understand these stories, so we can make our own decisions about what we do with the information. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you soon. Bye.